Chapter 8, A Slippery Ride. Everybody was amazed by the fourth lucky number. But there were only 3, Holly complained. That's right, agreed Mr. Hollister. Something is wrong here. All the children and their parents could sense that one of the lucky number winners was a fake. Let me take a look at the numbers, Dad, said Pam. I can tell if I wrote them. First, she looked at the slip of paper in the last balloon brought in. It was all right. Then she looked at Ann Hunter's. Hers, too, was one which Pam had written. The first little boy was very nervous. He began to cry. Mine is real, honest it is. Pam looked at his slip. Yes, it was another she had made out the night before. All this while, Joey Brill was edging towards the door. Pete spied him. Not so fast, Joey, he shouted. Let's read yours again. Joey might have got away, but the crowd held him back. Gingerly, he handed his slip to Pam. Dad, this isn't one of mine, she cried, looking intently at the paper. It isn't my writing. She turned to Joey. I'll bet you were the one who peeked in our window last night and saw what we were doing. When Joey heard this, his lower lip began to tremble. He looked at the floor. Although no one said a word, they were sure he had tried this way to get a prize. You're not playing fair, Pam cried. Joey was scared. With his eyes still down, he ran out of the store and dashed toward his home. I'm glad he's gone, sighed Holly, and he was soon forgotten. The grown-ups who had come with the children began to look at the many attractive items on the counters and bought a good many. Tinker and Mr. Hollister and even the children were kept busy wrapping up toys and hardware. After the crowd had thinned out, Mr. Hollister sat down to talk to Pete and Pam. Your idea was wonderful, he praised them. This is more business than I've had since the store opened. I'm going to give all of you children a special treat as a reward. What is it, Dad? Pam asked. I'll tell you at dinner tonight, their father replied. It'll be a surprise for the whole family. That evening, Mr. Hollister told them they would all go for a picnic supper in the state park the next day. He would leave his store at 4 o'clock. Swell, Ricky cried, bouncing in his chair and nearly knocking over his glass of milk. The children were eager to see the state park, which lay north of town on the shore of Pine Lake. No automobiles were allowed beyond the entrance to the park. There were many trails and bicycle paths, which led to a pine grove, where there were fireplaces and picnic benches. Mr. Hollister said that just inside the entrance to the park was an amusement center. In it was a merry-go-round, a roller coaster, and other exciting rides. Can we go on the amusements? Sue asked. Any you want to, Mr. Hollister said, winking at his wife. The next afternoon, the girls helped their mother prepare a big picnic supper, which they packed in a special basket. Dave Meade, who came to see Pete, heard about the trip. Say, you weren't planning to take Zip, were you? He asked. Dogs aren't allowed in the state park. We'll leave Zip home, Pete replied. How about my keeping him at my house till tomorrow morning, Dave asked. Then he won't get lonesome. Since Dave and Zip had become good friends, Pete said, sure, go ahead. Well, I have to go cut our lawn now, Dave said. See you tomorrow. Come on, Zip, old boy. By the time Mr. Hollister returned from work, his family was ready to leave. Tinker will close up at 6 o'clock, he told them, as they set off in the car. When they arrived at the park, the children ran up eagerly to the entrance. What would you like to do first? Their father asked. Ride the merry-go-round, Ricky answered. The others agreed it would be a lot of fun to ride on the wooden animals while the music played. Finally, the merry-go-round came to a stop. Mr. Hollister bought tickets, and the children hopped on. Ricky grabbed hold of a golden horse and was in the saddle in a jiffy. Holly, who was wearing her dungarees, climbed onto the back of a giraffe. Pete sat on the shoulders of a dancing bear, while Pam, holding little Sue in her lap, rode in a yellow chariot. "Are you going to ride with us?" Holly asked her mother and father. "Indeed we are," Mrs. Hollister replied. She and her husband picked horses which were located side by side. Mrs. Hollister rode side saddle, while her husband flung himself up onto his steed as if he were a Texas Ranger, making the children laugh. Slowly the carousel began to turn. The little whistles tooted and the drums played. Up and down went the horses, the bear jogged from side to side, and the chariot swayed gently as if it were on Pine Lake. What fun it was! The children's shouts could be heard above the music. When the merry-go-round stopped, Mr. Hollister jumped off and bought 7 more tickets. As the carousel started for the next ride, Ricky had an idea. He was growing a little tired of just bobbing up and down on his horse. He would shinny up the pole to the roof of the merry-go-round and look down. Standing on the horse's head, Ricky grabbed the pole and began to climb upward. Suddenly, the man in charge of the merry-go-round spied him halfway up. "Get down from there," he shouted. "Get down from there before you fall." But the calliope was playing so loudly that Ricky did not hear the warning. He climbed to the top of the pole and reached out to grab the bar to which it was attached. Now the bar was covered with slippery grease, but Ricky did not know this. He reached up. By this time, Mr. Hollister had leaped from his horse and was standing below Ricky. As the boy grasped the greased bar, his hands slipped from it. He plunged downward, right into his father's arms. Meanwhile, the merry-go-round man had pulled a switch which stopped the carousel. He rushed over to them. "Phew," he exclaimed, "that was a close one. Nobody ever tried to climb to the top of the merry-go-round before. Is this your little boy?" Mr. Hollister said yes, and he was very sorry for the trouble he had caused. His wife was very much relieved that Ricky had landed all in one piece, and gave him an affectionate squeeze. But she said, "Never do that again." "I won't, Mother," he promised. "Cross my heart." The merry-go-round man said he had a little boy Ricky's age and knew that they were up to all kinds of tricks. He went to get a cloth for Ricky to wipe his hands on. "I guess we've had enough riding for a while," Mrs. Hollister said. After Ricky had cleaned his hands, they walked off to see the other amusements. Pete and Pam raced ahead, but soon Pete came running back to the others. "They have a brand new ride," he said. "Go-karts. Come on and look." Not far away was a midget racetrack. On it were 6 little automobiles. "They have real motors," Pete said. "May I ride one, Dad?" Mr. Hollister spoke to the man in charge. The midget autos were very safe, he said, and anybody over 10 years old could ride them. Ricky was disappointed when he saw his father buy tickets for only Pete and Pam. But he would play some other game, Mrs. Hollister promised. As Pete and Pam got into their little automobiles, 4 other children bought tickets and climbed in. The 6 cars were lined up. At the word go, they started off around the track. "This is going to be a real race," Holly said as she watched. First, a boy with a red sweater was ahead. Then Pete took the lead. But Pam kept her car near the rail, and soon she was out in front. The little cars had just enough gasoline to go 6 laps around the track. The boy in the red sweater began to gain on Pam. One by one, the others dropped behind. Pete's car developed engine trouble and stopped on the 4th lap. "Come on, Pam, come on," her family yelled. "Win the race, Pam." She did not hear this because the wind was making a rushing noise in her ears. Pam held steadily to her course and crossed the finish line first. A great cheer went up from all the onlookers. The children's next stop was at the Rocket to the Moon booth. It was Ricky's turn now. On the counter lay 6 tubes loaded with rockets the size of clothespins. In the rear of the booth hung a lighted moon. Ricky's first and second rockets went above it. Just like the cow that jumped over the moon, Sue laughed. Ricky took careful aim. Whiz! The next rocket went straight through the moon, and he received a prize. Hooray! Cried Holly. Good for you, Mr. Hollister said. And now let's eat. Mrs. Hollister had a suggestion. Let's rent bicycles and ride to the picnic spot. Mr. Hollister thought this would be a good idea. First, they walked back to the car to get their picnic basket. The bicycles were nearby, lined up in racks at the entrance to the park. Pam and Holly picked out the ones they wanted right away, and so did their mother. Ricky selected a small bicycle, and Mr. Hollister a big one with a wire basket fastened to the handlebar. He put Sue into it. Pete kept looking about for a bicycle suitable for himself. Suddenly he exclaimed, "Here's a bike just like the one I lost." "Say, that does look like it," said Holly. "It has a scratch on the fender, the same as yours did." Pete knew a way to find out for sure. Only last month, he had put a message in a secret hiding place on the bike. He had written it on a paper and had wrapped the paper around the battery inside the bike's headlight. While the bicycle renting man looked on in surprise, Pete unscrewed the lens of the headlight. He reached in and drew out the battery. There was a paper wrapped around it. Pete opened the paper. On it was printed in ink, "This bike is the property of Peter Hollister."